Coaches, are you ready to revolutionize your game preparation? For the past 5 seasons, coaches across the nation have been using the ultimate scout team game changer, the Coachpad. Imagine this: no more scrambling on weekends to prep scout cards, no more fumbling with paper and binders. Whether you're drawing your cards digitally with a computer program or sketching them by hand, the Coachpad is your all in one solution. Picture yourself on the practice field effortlessly managing your scout team or standing on the sidelines during game day, syncing adjustments from the press box to your coaches on the sideline and back. With the coach pad, you can clearly see your scout cards even in the brightest sunlight. No more squinting or dealing with the wind blowing clear vinyl sleeves everywhere. This offseason, take your coaching to the next level. Get your coach pad today at thecoachpad.com and gear up for a winning season ahead.
Welcome back to another episode of the Gap Down Backer podcast. Today we have the offensive coordinator at the prestigious D3 school here in the state of Ohio, John Carroll. He is Coach Travis James. He is the offense coordinator. Coach, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Coach. Thanks for having me.
No problem. It was good chit chatting with you beforehand, and like I said, kind of going through kind of where I first saw you, and then talking about our mutual friend. But for people who don't know, how did you end up at John Carroll?
Yeah, that's a great question, Coach. Number one, I'm lucky that I get to work for, in my opinion, the best head football coach in the country, and Jeff Behrman. And so just kind of working in reverse order, I arrived at John Carroll about 2.5 years ago today, and we made our arrival here from Union College. We were lucky to have a great experience there in upstate New York, and by I mean myself, and getting to work with Jeff there. We were a playoff team on a 21 game win streak. Lucky to be at one of the top Division III programs in the country. And then what brought me to Union was my time at Rhodes College in Memphis, Tennessee. I went down initially as the offensive coordinator, and through some staff dynamics, ended up as the interim head coach down there in Memphis, which is an outstanding city. I love my time there. And prior to that, I served as the associate head coach and the offensive coordinator at Illinois College, which is in Jacksonville, Illinois, which is actually my alma mater. I was lucky to work for my head football coach, Garrett Campbell, who's now the head football coach at Cal State Fullerton. He's won 2 national championships as a head coach there. And then one of my best friends, Ray DeFrisco, who's still the head coach at Illinois College right now. And previous to that, I helped start the Missouri Baptist program from the ground up, an NAIA school in St. Louis, Missouri. And when you don't have a helmet, a chin strap, a player, or anything else, you learn quite a bit in a short amount of time. So I couldn't be more grateful for my career, how it began there. And then at the time, I also GA'd for Charles Coe, who coached this year will be his 50th year in college coaching. 40 years plus in Division I, the wide receiver coach for the Raiders. I learned so much football and so much about just being a professional from him. So I'm so lucky to have had time from that as a young coach.
Now with that, how have you kind of evolved offensively? Because again, people can look up your thing with Nate on Chief Pigskin. Like I'm pretty sure it's on YouTube. If not, it's on his website. But I'm 90% sure it's on YouTube. And that's kind of where I first kind of saw you, and you guys were doing some good stuff back then. I
Sure.
mean, how have you evolved offensively, just from either the start of your career or just from then? Because again, you learn something every year, you add, you subtract, all that jazz.
Mhm.
How have you personally evolved in kind of what you do?
Well, that's a good question, and kind of a question for me in the best way. Now, number one, and Nate Albo is awesome. I think the work that he did was great. I would be foolish if I didn't help him out. We were lucky to be there as he started Chief Pigskin, and I was happy to contribute as much as he could. He's a great man, a good Christian and a good man. So I enjoyed spending time with Nate. But the way I evolved, it's very cyclical, Nick. So when I think about my football DNA, I'm kind of a philosophical guy. So I think about this, every once in a while. When I was a young player, I'm from Southern Illinois. I'm from 22 miles straight east of St. Louis. And so I grew up in wing T system. We were like, everything that we did was Nebraska, right? Or our interpretation of Nebraska. We were a Husker powerlifting team. We ran some triple, we ran buck sweep and trap, and we looked wing T-ish at times. So I think some of that is just baked into my blood. I'm a gap scheme football aficionado, so to speak. So that's always been a piece of me. But when I jumped into the college ranks, that's when I was really introduced to two styles of thought. Number one was the West Coast, and number two was the spread offense. My head football coach, Garrett Campbell, to this day is one of the most intelligent football coaches I've been around. And he grew up in the traditional West Coast system. He learned when he was the offensive coordinator at Menlo College out there in California. He learned it from Bill Walsh. And so he had a specific school of thought. But at the time that I was coming up in college, it was also the time of the spread offense where things were growing. So we still had a strong interest to throw the football at the time, but it was off of rhythm and timing. And Garrett had built together the combination of 10 personnel and really 11 personnel to adapt West Coast timing. And then as we've grown, that became okay. Now we were on the forefront of tempo. We were on the forefront of the RPO games and motion. And that's really when I was starting to coach. And so that's how I learned, 2x2 and 3x1 and 10 personnel. That was what we were going to make a living in. We were going to adapt into 11 personnel when we needed to versus odd front structures, and we were going to get as heavy as we needed to based on situation. Then as I grew as a coordinator, those old nagging voices of gap schemes and tight ends and all those pieces that had never left me, they really started to creep up. But then maybe more importantly, Nick, that's when defenses really started to change. When I became an offensive coordinator about 10 years ago this season, that's when I knew that we needed to play with tight ends in the game. We needed to control these odd front teams. We needed to be able to not just move the ball through possession passing and have a re-emphasis on the run game. And that's built really who we are right now as a true run play action team. And so what happened was, at one point in my career, we were averaging as much as 89 plays a game. We were flying and we were doing everything that looks popular now. But what we've kind of done is, I don't know if you'd call it de-evolution, maybe just being more cyclical. Now we get in and out of the huddle. We're going to play and we're going to be almost with this year, we were more of a 12 personnel team than we've ever been. But the tight end's never going to leave the field. And we are truly a run play action team. We just probably do it a little bit sexier than most people do it. So I know it's kind of a roundabout story, but hopefully you can kind of get a little bit of insight into how we've also adjusted to how the football world's changed as well.
Now when you're talking 12 personnel, are you talking two true tight ends, or are you talking the tight end with quote unquote the fullback, H-back, sniffer, whatever you want to call that kid? Like, it doesn't matter. Like, what like, are we true like good old with ace personnel, or are we more that sniffer-ish look?
That's a phenomenal question. I think we do a really good job of personnelling our 12 personnel looks. So it's all going to begin with two true inline tight ends if we can handle it, right? One may be off the ball in a wing position, but they're going to be more tight end bodies. That's what we'd like to build from. But then pretty quickly we jump into two different universes. Two-back football is just different, as you know, right? So to be able to identify a true fullback, if we have that ability, we will have a package of two-back style plays. And I was trained years ago. This was some insight from the guys at North Dakota State. If you can't recruit the fullback, take your linebacker that's going to be a third stringer that ain't going to play and move him, and you're going to have a hell of a player. That's been the piece of their philosophy forever that we've adapted. So those 12 personnel and 21 personnel looks can look like similar formations, but we have different packages from both. And I think one of the last pieces of how we manipulate it is we're not afraid to play with an extra offensive lineman on the field. We're lucky that we recruit guys and we build from the front. And this year we played 36% of our snaps with an extra offensive lineman on the field as one of those tight end players. And at the same time, we broke 3 passing records at John Carroll here. So it's anybody who says that you can't do both or you can't have your cake and eat it too, they're full of it. So that's kind of the way we approach the personnel and the 12 personnel.
Now, also with that, like watching film and talking to some of my friends, um, you do a really good job with both your motion, trading, misdirection. Kind of how has that evolved for you as well? Because again, it goes back to maybe some of those wing T roots that are in you, where
Mhm.
that's a big part of the wing T under center old school philosophy of okay, we're going to motion, we're going to trade, we're going to do those things. Which I think as you watch football in general right now you see a lot more of that in the NFL and college where you've kind of like you mentioned slow down the tempo a little bit so you can do those kind of things. You want to kind of talk about how that's been implemented in your offense?
Yeah, no doubt. And so those old school wing T principles that we talked about that I don't know that I necessarily knew the specifics of. It's just one of those things that are native to who you are and who I am. But then the power of motion was something that was really taught to me by my college head coach, Garrett Campbell, who I also work for. I've mentioned a couple times already, in terms of being able to give advanced indicators and to be for us to be able to build accelerators in the mindset of the quarterback. And so we were a big motion team even in those times where we were still operating primarily in 10 personnel because of the instructions that we could give to the quarterback and in turn the offensive line. I do believe the offensive line needs to know when you're motioning. That is something that's important. And as an O-line coach, I can tell you that you can help them significantly or hurt them significantly if they don't understand the intent to what you're doing. But shifting was always something on at the end of the day that we used in chunks. There was a time like in 2017 before we really ripped the band-aid off. Every single snap of 2017, we moved somebody. Every snap, whether it was a motion or a shift. And that's really when my brain started to churn of, okay, man, maybe we can get something and get people in and out of checks the right way. And then I think the other piece from that time, and I'm obviously getting to what it looks like today, is I work for defensive coaches. And I listen to all these cover four guys, and everybody's got automatic formation checks, and they're going to blitz you based on surfaces and where is the back and where is the tight end. And they have all these moving pieces to try to have the chalk last. And my point to them and my point to myself and my staff is, well, if the defense wants to have the chalk last, I think we got to get a little bit more involved pre-snap. And so that's why we move as much as we do. And it's advanced to the place where there's 3 levels of movement within our offensive system. There's a stem that are player driven movements. In other words, the timing and the set and the origin and the final destination of certain players on the field is going to be driven with the speed of the player. They're going to make that decision on when to move. Then there is a shift where the quarterback's going to move multiple people at the same time. And then obviously there's motion. And so as we get into plan, there are certain things that we are always looking to disguise. Like, for example, Nick, like we are a big tight end wing run team and passing team. We're going to build a tight end wing surface, but we're rarely going to break the huddle and just put the tight end in the wing, whoever those personnel players may be, like we talked about earlier. We're rarely going to start them where they're going to end up, right? Whether it's trading both of them together, whether it's moving one and motioning the other, we're going to try to disguise our final origin as best we can to protect some of the things that we do best. And then those combination movements obviously help us get ahead of the defense that now they've got to make, in some cases, 3 checks before we've ever snapped the football. So, in other words, what we've built the motion system to do is take some of that picture perfect diagrams of the defense and kind of take the chalk back from the defense, and it's helped us significantly.
I do want to go back to something you said about motion and the O line. Can you kind of hit on that a little bit more and kind of the pros and cons and kind of why think they need to be informed so much? Because I think, especially for high school coaches, that little tidbit right there might be missed
Sure.
And like again, whether you're wing tee, shotgun, doesn't matter. I think that's maybe some good insight that coaches might be able to learn from.
Yeah, I believe that, when we're diagramming on whatever your game plan days are, Saturday and Sunday as a high school coach being the big meaty days of the plan, or Monday and Tuesday as college coaches, we all have a bunch of ideas that are awesome, right? We can shift here and motion here, and oh, they have no idea what's going on, where the snap was. It all looks good. And then sometimes when you're really drawing things up, you're like, man, the defense may not know what's going on, but I don't know how they're going to respond, and that may screw me. And so this is maybe a reminder in addition to just as we map things out. I think it's important, coach, like you got to draw your pieces up for the guys in the blocking core. And the blocking core for us, because they operate so much together, the O-line, the tight ends, and the running backs. And I think when you have your run game plan, and certainly when you're thinking through what you're asking through people to do in protections, and maybe we're a little bit different than most because we're going to carry on average about 8 to 10 protections in a game. You better know, like as you're drawing things out and anticipating some of the movements or manipulations that the defense may do, when you get in those pieces where you're trying to predict their movements, if it's something that you're unsure of, you better be damn sure that it's going to be able to be captured by whatever runner protection that you have. And the gap scheme world does a pretty damn good job of cleaning up pictures, especially gap schemes with two pullers being counter or G lead down, like I see down drawn up behind you, right? Those things have a way to be great fixtures. But if you're in the zone world or single puller world, one back power be an example, or inside or outside zone, and you're unsure about how you're going to get the O-line to point out who the mic's going to be, how this front may move, you could be putting yourself in a bad situation. And I think that when you're drawing it out and you're trying to figure it out, you just got to ask yourself, is the juice worth the squeeze? I don't know what's going to go on. So is this worth going through every bit of explanation that I'm going to have to carry into this to make it go? So those are just hard decisions. I think that comes with the territory of being a shift motion team.
I do want to go back to one other thing you said before we hit on our last topic. You mentioned there was a season where you went every play, somebody was moving.
Yes.
I two questions regarding that. One, what was why did you go in saying, hey, we're going to do this every time?
Right.
And part two of that is, did you get the reactions you expected from the defense, or like, actually, let's just go on the why first. Why shift, trade, motion every play? Because again, that's again back to what you just mentioned about the O-line. That's a lot for you're going to get moving pieces or maybe ways you don't expect, but at the same time, you're causing a defense to think. So kind of what was your philosophy on why you moved every play?
Yeah. So back then, when we made that decision, we were still a no huddle team and we were operating at relative tempo. And then after a season, we did a self scout. I thought we did a great exercise. We had the defense study the offense and the offense study the defense. And I mentioned that I worked for the defensive head coach at the time. And he mentioned how predictable at the end of that season, we still had a great year. We were number 18 offense in the country. We were doing great things, but how predictable the tight ends alignment and the backs alignment had become. And when we looked at things in the postseason with more of a critical eye, that those are really things that were very consistent for us, whether it was the final alignment of the back with regards to the passing strength of the back with regards to the tight end surface. So in that year, the beginning of the shift motion revolution for us was, well, we're just going to move the tight end all the time. I'm sorry, we're going to move the back all the time. And when a tight end's involved in the scheme, we're going to move him too. So we were at that time, we were not willing to make the sacrifice to go full bore. And then we had a couple preset shifts that were also one-word calls that we were going to be in formation systems that gave us something. Like we had a bone look in the backfield that they didn't have an alley player. When we would call that shift, Rocket was going to get tossed out to the field unless there was an alley player. Then we'd kill the play that we had called. Or we were going to put quads in the boundary, and if they were playing us 3 over 4, we were going to throw the now screen. And if there was 4 over 4, we'd motion into the called formation, right? Little things like that. So that's where things started growing. Now, as time's gone on, now it's because we put ourselves back in the huddle. And I don't think that this can be understated. The simple act of getting in and out of the huddle and not just rushing to the line of scrimmage and making people declare and define where the eligibles are and how the brink of the huddle is, that is quote unquote a shift in and of itself, especially for modern college football teams. Not a lot of people get in and out of the huddle, period. So that's kind of taken the necessity or the need for us to truly shift in motion every snap compared to how we were about 7 years ago. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more clarity on that side, Coach.
It does. And I think that kind of covers it. But like, I want to hit on something that you mentioned, screens right there. And I think like watching your stuff and then talking to some people, that's stuff you guys do really good as well. How has your screen game evolved over the years in terms of being a part of your offense?
Yeah. Well, when we were more of a quote unquote spread style offense where we ran the snot out of the quarterback and we had some very unique RPO options with the quarterback run game at the time. Those were all good pieces, but the screen game has always been for me, quote unquote, it's a smoke break for the quarterback. He don't have to read anything. And even in the world of a double screen, it's very simple. It all gets back really tied to the rhythm of his footwork. So I looked at those as a way, and I say this all the time in install meetings, or if you hear me talk about screens at all, it allows us to create another line of scrimmage somewhere else. Where it's evolved the most is all of our early screen game was built really off of protect and drop back protections, right? We were going to have some running back chip screens off of full slide protection, or we were going to throw the fast screen. Everybody calls it something different, right? We're going to throw the ball to the number 2 receiver. Number 3 is going to go block the overhang. You're going to get 3 or 4 linemen out in front, and you're just creating a punt return, right? Which that's still the piece of what we do. But then now what it's become, and over time what it's become is our screen game has in many ways been one of the primary replacements for boot. Because I think defenses are better than ever at defending bootleg, right? With the dynamic players that play on the edge, with the frequency of field nickel pressure, that becomes a challenge. And so what we've been able to do is be able to use a core set of rules in the screen game. And the most important thing that we can do in that core set of rules is they're going to be built around a puller, right? They're going to be built around a puller that's going to be pulling opposite of where the screen is going to be thrown. And the second piece that the rule system's been able to adapt to is that we've been able to target different players. Not every screen's got to go to a damn wideout. Not every screen's got to go to a running back, right? But I think what we've been able to do to juice up the tight end position and the way that we've been able to be creative with running back screens has kind of allowed us to let our wideouts kind of be like smoke screen guys. So really, Coach, to kind of put it all together in a ball in a package, Nick, is we've been able to marry our run actions to our screen game, and that's what's really been indicative of how much we've evolved over time.
Okay. Coaches, one, give Coach a follow on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it these days. It might have a different name by the time this comes out, knowing how Elon works. Check out John Carroll Football. If you got any athletes, send them their way. Like, share, subscribe, all that lovely jazz. Check out our sponsor, Coachpad. Otherwise, that is another episode of the Gap Down Backer podcast.